Everyone, welcome to Anu's classroom. This is the last part of our MMPC 7 business communication. In this video, we'll be covering cross-cultural communication and ethics. And with this, we will have covered the entire MMPC 7. Okay, so Mahatma Gandhi rightly said that a nation's culture resides in the heart and soul of its people. Culture is not something which we are born with. Culture is and there is no particular book where it is written this is supposed to be the culture of a particular place, right? Culture is something that we acquire through our associations with the people around us. The people around us, or the entire the society around us, that is the collection of people, is what gives birth to, or uh, is what makes up the culture, right? So I would say maybe most probably what almost majority of the people around us agree upon or shun, that is what forms the culture. So a nation's culture, so that is what Mahatma Gandhi also said rightly, it resides in the hearts and the soul of its people. So, what is culture? Let us look at a little bit of a kind of like a formal definition of the word culture before we can go ahead and discuss on the cross cultural communication. So, culture is a complex compilation of all the beliefs, the customs, law, knowledge, traditions, etc., that a human being acquires while being a member of a particular society, right? So, what are the characteristics of this culture? First and foremost, it is acquired. That is, we derive it or acquire it from individuals who are already experiencing the culture. It is collective. That is, it thrives with people and society. If there was not a society, then there would not have been a need for a culture, right? Then, it is a value system and it tends to adhere to core values shaped by our culture. There is a stability in the culture. It is not that our cultures don't change. Cultures change over time, but it is a very slow process. You think of the Indian culture. Um, the culture that we are currently in is vastly different from the culture that our grandfathers or their grandfathers had at that point of time, right? It has changed a lot, and a lot of things have led to that change. Invasions, trade associations, the changes in technology, the changes in other cultures across the globe, and our associations with them. All those things have shaped our cultures. So, and it will keep on upgrading, it will keep on changing in the future. Maybe 500 years from now, if we were to visit India once again, in directly from the culture we are in, we would not recognize India, right? We would be like, no, this is not the India that I know. This is not the India that I've experienced, right? So it changes, but it is not an overnight change. It changes very slowly because it takes time for changing people's mentality. It's not enough that one person's mentality about certain topics change. There should be a mass change, because if there is a majority number of people change their views or opinions about a particular topic, then that tends to affect the minority, and the minority keeps on decreasing, and that's when a cultural shift happens, right? Now, it is a differentiator. Different people belonging to different cultures are different, right? People belonging to different other cultures are different from the people who belong to a particular culture. Like the Western culture is different from the Eastern culture. So it is a form of differentiation for different people. It is a contextual thing. There is no precise definition for a culture. What exactly is the Eastern culture or what exactly is the Western culture? You cannot define it, but you can measure it in on the basis of certain characteristics, and we'll come to those characteristics very shortly. So, if you take different cultures across the globe, you will see that they are similar in certain aspects while they are different in certain other aspects. It is not that one culture is entirely opposite the other culture. Even in Western versus Eastern culture, whatever is not there present in Eastern culture, if you expect that, or whatever is in Eastern culture, if you just blindly write the opposite is true for the Western culture, it doesn't work that way, and we'll come to that very soon. Okay, so those are the characteristics of culture. Now, we have three main theories of culture in our MMPC 7. First theory is regarding culture in from the point of view of a functionalist. Second is the conflict view, and third is the symbolic view. So in these three views, or in these three vistas, what we look at culture from a different angle, from a different viewpoint or a vista. Okay, and accordingly we are trying to define what culture is, or what is the importance of culture, how culture is. Okay, so according to the functionalist view, culture is a mode of smoothing the functioning of a society. It inculcates what is deemed essential and important for the society. Whereas, if you come to the conflict view, it views culture as a norm that benefits some people while it hurts others. It causes demarcations and discriminations due to value systems. And symbolic view is where culture is thought to be based on interpretations that people lay on the conversations that they initiate, and that there is no right view of things. So, the good thing about India, since is that you can find all these three views, and much more when you talk about the Indian culture. Even when we all belong to the same Indian culture, it is a very heterogeneous mix, right? It's not just the languages that is different. From north to south, east to west, we are a mix of different cultures, but yet there is a common thread that runs uh, throughout all of our cultures, which binds us together, right? So that is why when we discuss all these three views, it hits home. All three of them kind of like hits home for me. Like I there are times when we view culture on a functionalist aspect, or on the basis of a conflict view, or even in a symbolic view. Now, coming to cross cultural communication. What is cross cultural communication? It refers to the adaptations that are done by people from different cultural backgrounds to make communication effective. So, cross cultural. So, communication between people belonging to different cultures is what cross cultural communication is, right? And almost all organizations, okay, just like almost most of the people, even if it is the east or west, harming other people for your own good is not something that is culturally acceptable, right? It is something we all, almost all cultures agree upon. Just like that, organizations also have a few set of core cultural values, or core values which are same throughout. Okay, and culturally competent organizations, they do have policies and strategies and systems in place to promote and encourage such effective cross cultural interactions in all aspects of human relations, including whether it be recruitment or hiring or retention, all these things. They have strategies in place, right? So most it is the MNC culture right now. Indian companies have people not just from India, but they have people from across the globe, like working for them. US based MNCs, the top fours, the big fours, Deloitte, KPMG, PwC, they don't just have US citizens, or England, or let's say European citizens working for them. They have offices set up in India where Indians are working for them. But then so here's the thing. So Indian employees have to work with their western counterparts, or international counterparts, and the culture of India would be different from the culture of, say, Japan or US or Europeans, Africans, right? The cultures are vastly different, but we find a way. And how do companies keep that cross cultural communication respectful, and does not uh, and prevent the entire thing from breaking down, is by educating its employees, educating on how to be mindful of the people who you're talking to, mindful that your culture may not be their culture, and trying to keep an open mind by communicating. That is how all the companies which have multi-regional presence make sure that cross-cultural communication happens smoothly. They have those strategies and systems in place. Okay, now what are the elements of cross-cultural communication? As I said, first and foremost, you should be aware that you may or may not be, while you're in an organization, or while you are setting up an organization or a business, you should be mindful of the fact that not all people you will interact with would have the same culture as you. So you should be naturally be prepared for that cross cultural communication, right? You should be mindful of your language. You can use humor, but with caution. Not all types of humor hits the same sense, right? Even even in my videos, I might think that something is funny and I might say it, but then all of you who might be hearing it may not feel it is funny, right? And some humors may or may not even cost me my audience, right? That is you. You might not like what I said, and then you might decide that this is not to my liking. This is, I can't relate with this, right? It happens even in the organizations. You might think that something is funny and you might say it, but then it might not be taken in the same way by the person who hears this, because they might come from a different cultural background and they might view those things a bit differently, and it could even cost uh, it could even cost too much, right? So we can use humor, but use it with caution, and make sure that you are open. Whether you are the one talking or you are the one listening, whatever it is, whichever what you can say, whichever side of the coin you're in, make sure you're open to that potential, right? So, on that regard, you might just yeah. On that regard, let us look at the barriers of the effective cross-cultural communication. So, definitely language, accents, the volume, speed, the formats, they might be different. So, it could cause a problem, right? Then non-verbal communication, like the gestures, the posture, the proxemics. Proxemics is nothing but the proximity, right? Proximity means what? The actual physical distance between two things. That is how. What is the proximity? So the word proximity itself denotes that distance. So proxemics is dealing with the what you can say, the effects of that distance, how close or how far that person is standing from you while they're communicating, right? Such things affect cross-cultural communication, not just cross-cultural communication but communication in general, right? Stereotypes are nothing but preconceived notions about people belonging to certain cultures. Cultural biases, like predisposition to assess behavior of individuals belonging to certain cultures. You might think like, okay, this so and so person is belonging to this culture, so they might be lazy or they might not be punctual at all. We have the idea, right? Once you're a politician, corruption, and not going to be on time. Okay, jada jada means head weight, right? Attitude will be there. Such things happen. That is a bias we form, right? Just because that particular person is right now doing a particular job or has started has gone to a certain place, like say if a person is a Gulf return or a US return, you automatically start associating them with, okay, they might be very modern, they might like booze, or they might smoke, or maybe they are very violent, like that, right? We automatically start associating them with that, or even like, okay, maybe we can make a fool out of them easily because they might not know what is acceptable or what happens locally. Such things happen, right? All these things come under either stereotypes or cultural biases, okay? And they are barriers to effective cultural communications, cross cultural communications. Anxiety is a very big barrier. You might be too anxious that you would not even be able to communicate, which otherwise you might have done perfectly fine, right? So anxiety is a big barrier in communication. Now, how do we overcome these barriers? Again, be aware, accept, and adjust, right? Be aware of the cultural gap, right? Be aware of the cultural distances. Accept that what your culture and their culture is different, and try to make adjustments from both sides. Adjustments should be from both sides. Then you can definitely overcome all these barriers. It's not just cross cultural communication, I would say. Communication in any form or barriers to be overcome, you should be aware, you should be able to accept and adjust. Okay, so a few strategies by which we can overcome these things are: first and foremost, don't be judgmental. Okay, but I would say it is not just overcoming cultural barriers but rather overcoming communication barriers. Is don't be judgmental, control your biases, be flexible, adapt to the language of the foreign culture, emphasize on relationships, seek help from local people, be observant, listen to them, listen to what's happening around around you, right? Stay eager to learn. Okay, do some research, build the knowledge, and slow down responses and assume positive intentions, right? Initially, in the initial phases, assume that whatever the other person is saying might these might would be being said with positive intentions. Don't assume negative intentions, right? So we have two major cultural dimensional models that are being discussed in this unit. One is Hofstede's cultural dimensional model and Hall's cultural dimensional model. These are the two models which are mostly stressed and is a good candidate for a question also. So depending on these, we have differentiators, like we you will get questions on how the Western culture is different from the Eastern culture, or how the culture of India is different from that of Japan, or how it is different from the US, such things like that. So we'll be discussing a few things over here, but it would be a good idea for you to just Google out the differences between, say, India and Japan, or maybe India and the Europe, or maybe Europe and US, how it is different, Europe and Africa, maybe Africa and Japan, how it is different. I'm not covering all those things over here because there are multiple, but then I'll cover at least two of the important ones here. But it is always a good read if you get the time, at least even before the exam. Just go through such different like country versus country, culturally, and you would get good points. Okay, so Hofstede's cultural dimensional model. Let us define how. Let us see first on how Hofstede defined culture. Okay, according to Hofstede, he defined culture as a collective programming of the mind. Okay, which distinguishes the members of one group or category of people from another. So over here, the key aspect is it is a collective programming of the mind. Okay, that is what is culture according to Hofstede, and according to him, he gave six dimensions based on which we can distinguish cultures. First one is the power distance index, that is the degree of acceptance of what you can say inequality. Okay, I'll just write it up: degree of acceptance of inequality. That is the power distance index. Okay, then we have the individualism versus collectivism, right? So if at all there is a failure or a success, is it attributed to a particular individual or as a group, entirely as a group? That is what is meant by individualism and collectivism. Then masculinity versus femininity, that is who has the concentration of power and control in society. Is it acceptable that a woman holds supreme authority? Is it acceptable to the people of that nation, or is it not? That is um, masculinity versus femininity. Who has more power? Okay. Then we have the uncertainty avoidance index. Um, that just means how much the culture is, you can say, is okay with uncertainty or ambiguity. How much can they tolerate uncertainty? Then long versus short term orientation. That is how easy they are with changing. Okay, ease of change, I can write. Okay, how okay are they to change? Are they okay with constant changes, or do they, as a culture, like long term, think of a long term perspective? Okay, that is what is long term versus short term orientation. Then we have indulgence versus restraint, that is how much do they allow social freedom. Hmm? So let's write it as level of social freedom. So these are the six dimensions which distinguish cultures according to Hofstede. So if the question comes on, let's say, discuss about Hofstede's cultural dimensional model, then you can definitely write down what culture is according to Hofstede, and then you can talk about these six dimensions that distinguish the culture. Then you can talk about what you understand by these six dimensions, and then based on these six dimensions you can go and give a small comparison of, maybe, say, India versus the US, or East versus West, something of that sort. Okay, so let us look at India versus US on the basis of these six dimensions. Okay, so power distance index, if you look at India, it is very high, right? There is a very large inequality which we can observe in our, right, starting from the caste systems to almost everything that we have that power distance index. People at the top and people at the bottom, they are not equal, right? But if you think about it in US or in the West, it is not, it is there. I'm not saying that the power distance index is not there, and we should not be outright writing opposite of what we write for the East, opposite we write for the West. That is not the case, right? It is there, but it is not as high as what you would see in the East. Japan, it is much more higher than India, right? So it is there in the West, but it is moderate. And then individualism versus collectivism. India is more like a group effort, right? If you go to any organization, rather than saying that, okay, this person is responsible for this, it is more like, okay, rather than pinpointing all the things, whether it be success or failure to just a single person, we generally attribute it to the group, right? If a student scores 100%, we start by thanking all our teachers, all our friends, all our mentors, and everyone around us, relatives, family, friends, father, mother, everyone, right? It is attributed to the group. Same way, if there is a problem, then the entire government is at fault, right? On a political scale, the ruling party is at fault, correct? It is not, we don't pinpoint it exactly one particular minister and say only that person is at fault, right? We do say, but more than that, it is okay, this whole party is like this only. That is the first thing that comes, right? We generalize it. So it is a collectivism that we have. Whereas if you look at it in the US, it is or in the West, it is much more individualized. Something happens, that particular person is taken action against, or that particular person is given the benefits of it. It is much more individualized than the East. Okay, masculinity versus femininity. Over here you can see, whether it be US or India, East or West, it is mostly a masculine society. Not many cultures are okay with women ruling, right? It's not that we are not at all okay with it. We are, to an extent, but given a choice, on a practical level, we tend to choose the masculine and not the feminine, right? It is that what we are as a culture. There are tides of change. It is changing worldwide. It is changing. It is trying to get normalized, but we are, to be honest, we are a long way from there. We are still, for all good purposes, we are still masculine. Uncertainty avoidance index. You can see both cultures have moderate uncertainty avoidance index. Long versus short term orientation. We, as Indian culture, in our culture, we always look for long term orientation, right from a piece of cloth, whatever we buy, or whatever projects we undertake, we have a long term objective. Like, we put it to the maximum use. We want it to last as much as possible. It is not a use and throw, right? But in the West, it is much more shorter than us, right? So in that case, we can say that they have a shorter term orientation. Indulgence versus restraint. We are definitely a very highly restrained society, right? It is less indulgent. We believe in hard work and almost no play attitude, whereas in the US, it is work hard, play hard attitude. They are much more highly indulgent socially. They give importance to their desires and impulses. Again, this is an aspect where Indian culture is currently undergoing a flux of change. Our generations do give importance to our desires and impulses, and we are a little bit more indulgent than, let's say, our parents, right? We are much more uh, socially mingling. We want to enjoy life. We want to work and make money, but we want to enjoy our life too, rather than saving up for the next generations or the next to next generations, like our grandfathers or our forefathers used to do. We are more interested in also living our life, right? So this is again a point where India or the Eastern culture is currently going through a flux. Okay, the next is the Hall's cultural model. So again, just like Hofstede's cultural model, we start by defining according to Hall what culture is. So according to Hall, culture is a form of communication that is governed by hidden rules. It is a form of communication governed by hidden rules, and that hidden rules involve both speech and action. In different cultures, individuals use different means to communicate, ranging from just words to using body language and touch, behavior, and para-verbal communication, right? Even, like, it's true, right? If you think about it, in Indian culture, we don't just go by the word, right? We also look at the situation, the tone of speech, the way it was said, all those things, right? Where it was said, all those things, depending upon all those things, the context or the meaning of that particular communication changes, right? Yeah, so that is exactly what Hall is also saying, that different cultures use different means to communicate. Okay, and according to Hall's cultural model, we have three categories. One is context, the second is space and time. Context is how the message is communicated. Okay, that is, if it is a very high context means, um, it's not just the word but a lot of other factors which determine the meaning of the word, just like just the example which I said just before, right? We all might have come across, like our moms, definitely, if we have to ask our moms something, she might say and that may mean really yes you do, and maybe I dare you do it, right? We all know ours is a very high context culture. And then some cultures are low context, that is, whatever is said is what it means. It's direct, it's clear, and there is no scope of any misunderstanding there. What is said is what is meant. The second category is space, that is the proxemics. um, that is how much one is ready to share their space with others in different settings. How much are you okay with certain people, and how okay you are with allowing them to be close to you, right? Like, even in a very crowded space, you would be much more comfortable standing next to your brother or your sister than a total different stranger, right? So that is the space or the proxemics part of it. Then comes the time, that is how different cultures handle time. So that could be like monochronic or polychronic. Now, what it means, what does monochronic mean? It means that they fix the time limits and they don't like overlaps. One task at one time. And the other is polychronic, that is multiple activities can be done at the same time. So I would say India is a polychronic culture. We do multiple things at the same time, and we are fine with a little bit of an overlap and all. But I have had to communicate with people, especially like in uh, America, like Mexico and all. I've had to communicate with clients, and they are totally different. If we have to set up a meeting with them for, say, like discussing on a particular agenda, we discuss that, and then they're like, okay, that's done. If we have to discuss on something else, they would say, okay, let's set up a different meeting on it. They don't encourage mixing stuff up. Okay, if these are the objectives of our meeting, let's stick to those objectives, and if that is done, then that is it, the meeting is over. If you want to discuss on something else, then is a new meeting should be set up for that. Same way, like if that meeting is set for like 1 hour, in Indian context, like I've had Indian clients, uh, when working with Indian clients, even if the meeting gets extended by like maybe 10 15 minutes or even half an hour, if we think that okay, a little bit of more extension in this current meeting, if we can get the stuff done, if we can close it, find a closure, means we'll do it. Okay, but again, if it is a Western client and if the time's up, they'll be like, okay, the time is up, I have another meeting to attend to, otherwise, so let's wind this up here, and let's schedule another meeting to discuss further. That's what happens. um, so such differences are there. And being in an Indian background, sometimes I thought that okay, maybe what's the harm in just extending for 5 more minutes and just getting this done. But that's our culture. We are okay with it, but their culture, it is not acceptable. For them, it's like you've blocked 1 hour means 1 hour. After that, they have other matters to attend to, which also needs their attention. They don't encourage these overlaps. Okay, so that is the time aspect of it. So depending upon these three aspects, or depending upon these, we can again differentiate between the cultures of the West and East. So again, power distance index, if you say East, India, Japan, wherever, the power distance index is very high compared to the West. Hmm? East has a very high context communication, whereas West is much more lower context. In the East, punctuality is important, but West, getting work done is more important. And in the East, asking questions are encouraged. Like we don't restrain ourselves from asking questions, right? We don't care who the person is, We don't care. We just ask, right? Most of the time. But in the West, asking questions openly is actually not so encouraged. If you want to ask something to a person, they expect it to be done privately and not publicly. But it's not like that in India. So that is again a few ways to compare. So even if you get a question like compare the East versus West in terms of culture, or India versus US, generally I don't think you would get India versus Japan, because it is like kind of like East versus East. You might get Japan versus America, or Japan versus Europe. So in such cases you can write down points from both these models. Okay, if it is an open question not based on any particular cultural model, then you can write down all these points as differentiators. Okay, so yeah, so that was cross cultural communication. Now let us continue with ethics in communication. I think this video has gone too far. Okay, so maybe we'll make one more video on the ethics in communication. Okay, so thank you for listening. I'll catch you in another video, and there we will continue on with ethics in communication. All right.